Alex, Jill.
Well, welcome once again, everybody, to the latest edition of the ePublic of Letters. We're very lucky today to be joined by Jill Burke. Jill is the Professor of Renaissance Visual and Material Cultures at the University of Edinburgh. She is a cultural historian and an art historian who focuses on history of the body in Renaissance and early modern Italy. She's written extensively on patronage, the nude, and most recently, cultures of beauty and cosmetics. As many of you already know, her most recent book, How to Be a Renaissance Woman, was a BBC Book of the Week, a Waterstones Book of the Year, and a New York Times editor's pick. She's just co-founded, an historical reconstruction lab and a Centre for Historical Reconstruction at Edinburgh. Today, she's going to be speaking on why were beauty tips so popular in 16th century Italy? Readers, makers, and realms of knowledge in early modern cosmetic manuals. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you. Okay, I'll just make this big if I can. So please shout out if anything's not working because I can only see my PowerPoint. So let me know. So first of all, I'm going to start with saying thank you to Brian and Alex for inviting me. This is just a great thing where scholars of Renaissance and early modern culture across the world can talk to each other. I think it's really wonderful that I know how hard it is to carry on this stuff when you're also doing everything else involved in writing and researching and doing an academic post. So that's my thanks. And I'm also going to start with two apologies. The first is an apology for something I can't do anything about, which is that normally in these talks, I share something we've recreated in the lab. So normally I do share some kind of Renaissance cosmetics so audiences can understand the kind of things I'm talking about. That's not possible today, so I apologise. And normally that is quite fun and also stops people, I think, noticing any mistakes I make when I'm talking. Because the second apology is that I'm not quite as far forward in this work as I'd expected, largely due to a big admin role that I've got in Edinburgh at the moment. But let's start anyway with this image that I'm showing on the slide at the moment. I'm really fascinated with this image. It's a print of a game board from the late 17th century. It's for a gambling game with dice where players land on various squares, representing the typical day of an Italian housewife. So this is just one side of the board. And we see her here getting up, sitting in front of a mirror to do her hair and makeup. Then we see her building her hair up in this extraordinary way in the next slide. She cleans the baby, gives it food, buys some ribbons, does some spinning, sets the table and has dinner with her husband. How many women started the day by putting their makeup on in front of a mirror is, of course, unknown and unknowable. But it's only recently that people recognise that manipulating one's appearance to meet beauty ideals was an everyday task for many Renaissance women. It used to be assumed that cosmetic culture was necessarily elite and was largely concerned with putting poisonous stuff like arsenic, lead and mercury, or horrible stuff like blood, faeces and urine on one's face. None of this is entirely untrue. But the full wealth, richness and intelligence of this culture of beauty and cosmetics that is largely associated with women is only just starting to be recognised. The study of cosmetics has proliferated in recent years with really brand new works out actually by Erin Griffey and Evelyn Welsh. There's other work that's been important for a long time, people like Montserrat Cabray, Romana Salmon, who was involved in the Art of Beauty Schloss Ambrose exhibition that was recently on. All of these people together have shown that massive changes occurred in the care and beautification of the body in Renaissance and early modern Europe. The nature of cosmetics is pluralistic, and by that I mean it necessarily pulls on a diverse range of cultural strands. So it can be categorized as medicine, it can be categorized as art, it can be looked at in terms of artisanal cultures. And for that reason, it involves kind of engaging with a large range of scholarly literature. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about the scholarly literature that underlies some of the work that I've been doing. founded on Eamon's field-defining work on books of secrets in 1994. The study of recipe texts has helped us understand the early modern period as one of kitchen experimentation. And this work has started to reshape our understanding of what the movement formerly known as the scientific revolution, but also artistic change. And I'm thinking, of course, of work of people like Pamela Smith, for example, here. And how this change is driven by an artisan culture of intense engagement with materials, processes, and their transformation. Now, cosmetics are a really standard part of books of secrets, and although people tend to look at other recipes in books of secrets, dye recipes particularly, or medicinal recipes, most books of secrets, and I think I'll have a slide later on about this, or maybe most books of secrets do have cosmetics recipes in them. So I'm going to talk later about how they're part of what happens in households. They're also, however, different to recipes for health or dyeing or cooking, because they're really very much associated with femininity, both now and in the period. Men did wear cosmetics, and this is particularly more true probably in the 15th century. But by the 16th century, certainly, men who wore cosmetics were thought of as effeminate. Men did also worry about appearance, and I'll show there's many marks on one of the cosmetic texts owned by men about balding and trying to counter baldness. But it's certainly coded as feminine by the early 16th century care for beauty. The books that I'm going to focus on today are all books that are just beauty recipe books. This is a genre that hasn't really been recognised as a genre in Italy in the early 16th century, and they're all dedicated to women explicitly, and they anticipate a female audience. And that's very unusual for books in this period, so it's quite interesting to understand them as a genre. For this reason, this talk also intersects with some very great scholarly work on readership, or we could more accurately say the users of early modern medical and alchemical texts. I'm thinking here, of course, of Bill Sherman's pioneering work on annotation of early modern English texts, things on medical texts like the Census of Vesalius's Fabrica, published in 2018, which brought together lots of different kinds of annotations on all extant copies of Vesalius's Fabrica and worked out what readers were interested in. Mary Fissel's work on English chapbooks, or more recently, Tilman Tarper's really great essay on annotations on German printed distillation books. Because of women's lower literacy rates, books aimed at a lower class female audience especially would be seem to be doomed to commercial failure. But more nuanced understandings of reading in recent years have showed us the interaction between orality and literacy. Tiziana Plebani's recent, really beautifully titled Alle Donniche Niente Sanno focuses on what readership means in popular how-to books aimed at a female audience. And she shows both that more women were probably reading than is easy to understand through traditional sources, but also that these texts occupy, as many other scholars have found, particularly Jennifer Richards in England, the team led by Brian Richardson in the UK, about Italian texts, that there's a really close culture between orality and literacy. Recipe books, it seems, were not intended to be read silently, and they certainly weren't read from front to back like a novel. Jenny Richards, in a really good article, I think, on Thomas Reynolds' The Birth of Mankind, looks at annotations on a series of these books and takes seriously the idea that this book would be read out loud. The norm for recipes are certainly that they are transmitted in action by showing, touching, and talking. Recipes are just a kind of fragment, written fragment of a past action. Stefan Hans's very recent work on splashes in medical recipe books has shown that these were living texts on site in the kitchen or the pharmacy, on hand for the midwife, apothecary, or doctor. And this is my experience of reading any of the cosmetic books too, as I'll discuss. There's a lot of tacit knowledge in these texts, and in a way, talking about them without making up some of the recipes is very difficult. You do understand the materiality and the sense of the recipes much better through making. So recipes that sometimes don't make sense on the page because you don't know how they're going to turn out. If you make them, you can understand them and you can read kind of through the recipes and see the logic behind them. And as Alex said, we have just established a historical reconstruction lab in Edinburgh. And we do accept visiting scholars. We're just starting to accept visiting scholars from this summer if anyone wants to come to Edinburgh and work with us. And of this, of course, I'm leaning on the work of many really great hands-on historians. Pamela Smith and Paula Hoti are here, also Sven Dupre, Marika Hendrickson, Marilyn Ball, and Marissa Nicosia, and many others. My understanding of these texts is profoundly affected by having made many of the recipes. Okay, so Cosmetics are part of the vernacular recipe culture that was to become so important in Europe in the 16th century, from the 15th to 17th century, with interrelations between cosmetics and other kinds of making really common in family manuscripts. And I'm just showing you some manuscripts here, all of which have cosmetic recipes. So the first is 14th century kind of derivation of a text of what have been called the Trotula text, so an earlier 12th century medieval text hailing from Salerno about the ornament of women. And this is part of a much broader medical collection, medical compendium, and that's really how cosmetic recipes are kind of derived from their Middle Ages sources. It tends to be from their medieval sources, tends to be in these medical compendium books. Then in the 16th century, you get a really proliferation of cosmetic recipes, and I'll show you that soon. But you also get them included in more informal, kind of handwritten, more scrappy recipe books. And you can see these in two texts. One from the 15th century on the right, Palatina 916 and the Biblioteca Nazionale in Florence, and one from the Welcome.
Jill?
Yeah.
Jill, your PowerPoint is not advancing. It's still on the same first slide for us.
No way! I've been advancing it and advancing it. My goodness. Can you see it if I do it like this?
Now it's moving. Yep.
Okay, like this then. Okay, these are the texts I'm talking about.
Thank you.
So they're worth looking at. So this Laurentiana on the right-hand side, that's 14th century medical manuscript. In the middle is a Welcome book of medical recipes, but this section that I'm showing is a section that starts discussing cosmetics, many cosmetic remedies here. And on the right-hand side, there's another, I have to say, less easy to read book of recipes associated with the Florentine, Castello family, a Florentine family from about the 1460s. Okay. Magic recipes, as I've said, also play a really important role in almost every single book of secrets in the 16th century. So Alessio Piemontese, which I show on the left-hand side, attributed to Girolamo Richelli, now has a section on cosmetics and a section on perfumes, as does Isabella Cortese, Fioravanti, and Giambattista della Porta. They all have these sections, which shows really how they're part of a regular household. I want to just, before we go to that slide, actually, I just want to mention here the important work that's been done on women's medical culture. And cosmetics and medicine are really closely connected to skincare. Sharon Strocchia has done some really important work on nuns' involvement in medical culture and other women's work in medical culture in Italy, in Florence particularly. Sheila Barker has worked on Medici women. And they both did an excellent article recently on Caterina Sforza's Experimenti, which include cosmetics. And then other scholars like Meredith Ray also looks at medical culture in Italy, and she also takes cosmetics seriously in her work in 2015 book on Daughters of Alchemy. It's clear now, also from people like Alicia Rankin, Elaine Leong, Montserrat Cabray, that many noblemen all over Europe gained considerable expertise in pharmacy and healing. Sharing the results of their work with their estate. So Jean Liébaut in 1564 notes that many great ladies in France distill waters and prepare ointments and other similar remedies in order to take care of their estates and the poor. I'd say about the history of science literature and about kitchen experiments, and maybe this is unfair, I do wonder if there's an unstated teleology in this literature about scientific knowledge, that these women were early scientists and were experimenting for pleasure. Whereas if you understand that cosmetics aren't just for rich women, it's also possible to think of poorer women experimenting rather more for necessity, rather than for some kind of abstract form of knowledge, and being more driven by, well, equally or more driven by expediency. And I think it is really important to understand that the cosmetics culture isn't the culture just of an elite. One of the things with looking at Italian recipe sources is the abundance of kind of embarrassment of abundance in terms of manuscripts. So although these sources are relatively well studied, these printed sources, there is a massive amount of Italian 16th century, 17th century, 15th to 17th century recipe manuscripts from households that are just still to be analysed. And this is noted by loads of historians. So Eamon said in 2011 that the challenges there's a challenge of profusion. Ray noted that Italian archives brim with recipe compilations. And Chiara Crisciani in 2015 said, there's still this great problem with Italian recipes, that there's so many of them, it's really hard to get some kind of epistemic thread and understand what the main ideas behind these texts are. There's this massive work of cataloguing, classifying, digitizing and transcribing that has barely begun. It means it can be hard to see the wood for the trees, and anyone who works with recipe texts will, I hope, understand what I mean by this. And so several people have used databases, for example, where you can trace recipes through different books and different texts. This was done by Tessa Story in a project about 20 years ago now with David Gentle-Corey, and Erin Griffey uses this to great effect in her new book on cosmetics, where she uses a database to trace cosmetic recipes through. But the issues, but the issue with that perhaps is that you lose sight of the text. It has a kind of flattening effect. If you see one recipe that goes from ancient Greek to 17th century England, what it does, although that's very important and interesting, it also loses the context and the specific audiences. And what I hope to show you with the text I'm looking at today is that they indeed do have specific contexts and specific audiences, and although they share a lot of recipes, they're also quite different. Okay, so before we get into the kind of really nitty-gritty of the texts, I'm just going to give you a really super overview of Renaissance beauty cultures for those people who don't know very much about it. So it's a truism of Renaissance artistic culture from the 15th to the 16th century that artists are obsessed with beauty, and particularly beautiful women. There's a perfect storm, really, of reasons for this. Classical precedent, obviously, by a fascination with Neoplatonism in Medicean circles, and this accounts for a lot of Botticelli's interest in these kind of perfected women, especially in Florence. And then in northern Italy, a real obsession with Petrarch and his ideal descriptions of Laura. Classical texts, in addition, actually deal squarely with women's cosmetics. So Ovid's Ars Amatoria and his Medicamina Faciae were both published in Latin and also in Italian in the later 15th century. So those texts were around for a long time. Hang on, let's get again. And you start to get people, this genre of painting that I call women getting dressed paintings, but which are conventionally called ladies at their toilet, start to be popular in northern Italy and then in Rome by the 1510s and 20s. By the 1520s, the listing of ideal features of women has become normal in all sorts of literature, and it goes right across the board. So you see it in Ariosto's epic poetry, you see it in sonnets, you see it in medical literature, and you see it in the many books actually about the beauty of women. And here's one of the most famous and influential texts, Annulo Forensola's Dialogue on the Beauties of Women, which was first published in 1548 but circulated before then. As you can see from the 1552 edition, what an ideal woman should look like was getting pretty precise by that point, with a kind of geometry of features here. But also colour was very important, having the right disposition of colour, having blonde hair, the right curl, the amount of curl in your hair, the right kind of dark eyebrows, pink cheeks and pink lips, and so on. One of the reasons why beauty was so important is it was linked with the outside of the body, and the way it looked was linked with the balance of humours on the interior of the body. And certainly as the 16th century wears on, you get marital advice saying that men should look for women who will complement their own balance of humours. And so, for example, if you are relatively cold humours as a man, you could look for a wife with less cold humours, and so on. But most men would fit in, would work. Most men would be good marrying a woman with a perfect balance of humours, like the woman here in this illustration. I don't even know if you can see my cursor, who's got thickly curled hair and is obviously looking down, smiling just as women should. At the same time, there's a strong moral framework that castigates cosmetics. So this is a quote from Juan Luis Vivez's On the Education of a Christian Woman on makeup. Why does a maiden paint herself with ceruse and colours of scarlet? If she aims to please herself, she is crazy. As is anyone who loves themselves more than everything else. If it's for men, she is wicked. Miserable you if you attract a husband solely through makeup, because then when you've washed it off, how will he feel about you? He then goes on to say you don't buy horses that are covered up with clothing, and so why do you find a wife who's covered up with makeup? There's also a really strong strand of satire associated with women's makeup, and there's a very popular leaflet derived ultimately from a poem by Bernardo Giambolari, Il Sonnaggio delle Donne, that was written probably in Florence in the late 1480s and was published from the 1490s, which describes a woman's makeup routine. Thousands of ampoules and little packets and vases, which inside are full of distilled waters, and so on. There's about 2 pages of this describing different kinds of makeup, and this section ends with, oh, just look at the shit they cover themselves with. So you can see there's this kind of laughter at women, but there's also this moral framework that says that women shouldn't be adorning themselves apart from in very specific circumstances. So advice to women and households from the church, and there's a book which I haven't added to the PowerPoint, but it was written in the 1520s, says that it's okay for women to wear makeup if they have some kind of unnatural change to their appearance. It's not possible for them to make themselves better than nature or God intended, but if they have some kind of unnatural change, it's okay for them to change it. And it's also okay for them to change it if it means that their husbands will not stray and commit adultery. This advice was from Thomas Aquinas, and people who write cosmetics books really, really play on these get out clauses. Okay. The fact that women felt beauty pressures is clear in some evidence from noblewomen of this time. So here's a letter from Isabella d'Este to her husband, castigating him for buying her a gift of partridges as she's trying to lose weight. This is discussed more in a book that I just brought out with Holly Fletcher and Christina Ott called Fat Bodies in Early Modern Europe, and we talk extensively about dieting practices there for both getting thinner and fatter. And here's Isabella of Aragon, who was castigated for her dark skin when she came from Naples to Milan to marry into the Sforza dynasty in the 1490s. And she developed, or at least it was associated with her, a recipe that comes up a lot for face whitening, of which mercury was a key ingredient. And interestingly, her teeth, there was an archaeological examination of her remains, and it showed that her teeth quite clearly show that they were blackened by mercury, and that also she tried to scrape off the enamel using some kind of a pumice stone or perhaps a metal rod. You can see scrapings here, trying to get the blackening off the teeth. Okay, so beauty was important for women, and women would use various types of material, even material that we might find unpalatable, to enhance their beauty and thus enhance their prospects. Let's turn to the texts. I've been looking at these 6 texts in particular because they're quite complete texts that are just focusing on women's beauty. And to my knowledge, they haven't really been looked at as in one thing, as a genre previously. 3 of them are manuscripts and 3 of them are printed books. So what we know about the manuscript, and they're all from 1500 is the earliest manuscript, and that's the Walters, which is on the far left. It's the Walters MSW478. So this is in Baltimore. It's probably belonged to the Calzolari family, who are a family of apothecaries from Cremona. It's a very fancy manuscript indeed. It's dedicated to the preservation of beauty and a theological virtue of faith. There's a partial copy of this manuscript in the Welcome, and this was transcribed by Laura Ramello in 1997 in an article that you really, really hard to find now. The second manuscript is in Bologna University Library. It's been dated around 1500, but I don't think it's around 1500. I think that's too early due to the binding and also the handwriting. I think it's likely to be later than that. I think maybe 1530s or 1540s. The third is the only one that we know the dedicatee of. It's for Chiara da Correggio. So that puts us in the small courts of Reggio Emilia. Correggio was ruled by Veronica Gambara at this time until 1550. And Veronica Gambara was a poet, was a patron, and also interested in cosmetics and beauty. So we know that milieu quite specifically. Then we have the printed texts. The first one is the Venusta, a series of texts that's really a pamphlet, an opuscolo of about 12 pages. And this was published many times. I'll show you this over the course of the 16th century. Then 2 more extensive texts, Rossetti's Notantissimi Secreti of the art of perfumery, and Marinello's Ornamenti delle Donne. I'll just say more about these. It's notable that all of these texts come from a relatively small area, from this kind of triangle between Venice, Verona, and Bologna, which includes the universities of Padua and Ferrara. The University of Padua particularly started teaching cosmetics to physicians under Gabriele Falloppio in the 1540s, and there's Latin versions of his cosmetic recipes, and also kind of informal version, Book of Secrets attributed to Falloppio. There's various, it seems that these cosmetic books, these cosmetic manuscript books, were probably part of a wider kind of genre of books that were presented to brides or young wives. So the treatise, so they all share certain physical qualities. They all have rubricated initials and titles of recipes. They're often on vellum or parchment as opposed to just paper. And some of them have fancy bindings. Those in their original bindings tend to have fancy bindings. So this is the Walters book, and the binding there, which is like similar to kind of the bindings associated with the Aldine Press. So that would put us late 15th, early 16th centuries, which feels right for the text as well. And this is the binding of the Bologna manuscript, which is very fancy indeed. And this binders are associated with the 2 German students called Pflug and Abelleben, who had their books bound in this way. from about the 1530s. The text, of course, could be earlier, but I see no reason particularly to date the text much earlier than that. All these texts, mainly and explicitly, give advice to improve the appearance. All have dedicatory letters, titles or introductions that explain their subject. All are explicitly aimed at a female audience, though no, not exclusively read by women, as I'll discuss. And it's hard to know where this genre started. There are some standalone medieval texts related to the third book of the Trotula, but this really seems to be a very late 15th, early 16th century genre that is related particularly just to northern Italy. Okay, so let's open these texts and see how the authors framed them to their readers. All of them have dedications in some way. We'll start with the Walters. We're going to go through these first, the manuscripts, and then the more or less, and then the printed books in more or less date order. The Walters writer clearly positions himself in the context of natural inquiry. So this is very much this kind of books of secrets, kitchen experimentation genre that cosmetics is often discussed in. All things that nature has produced in this lower world, he said, should be kind of investigated. And men with true experiment should employ their benefits. And he's also clear that he wants to separate himself from any kind of common looking after quick fixes for beauty, because he takes delight and pleasure in knowing how powerful nature is in producing new and pleasing effects, which the unskilled vulgar hold in little esteem. And then, so there's a theme of nature, which we see throughout these texts. And then the other theme that we see throughout these manuscript texts is the fact that it's really awkward giving a text on how to be more beautiful to someone you know, because it could imply that you're actually not very beautiful. So they always tend to have a kind of get out clause. And so his is that nature has already formed you most beautiful above all mortals, but hopes that the book will nonetheless not be useless to know the force of natural things, but also to be able thereby to satisfy with fitting modesty any kindly request. So these books are always given to women in the hope that women will be able to help other people with their beauty problems, not that they have beauty problems of their own. You see this again in the Chiara di Correggio manuscript. The person who wrote this was perhaps a friar apothecary. He says, being my profession to persuade people to free from all things that can give occasion to sin. And he also has recourse to nature and also kind of excuses himself for dedicating this book to Chiara. Nature, he says, has bestowed all the gifts that could adorn a perfect example and unique, a perfect individual and unique example of beauty. So he hopes he's giving it to her so they might render, in case that people have need of them, so that if other people might render themselves more pleasing to their consorts, because as regards both you and yourself and your husband, I'm certain you have no need. The third manuscript from Bologna, I thought initially might be actually copied from a more popular printed text that's been lost, because it has a really typical kind of ottava rima start, which would be very great to kind of say out loud, to read out loud in piazzas. And a lot of these books have these ottava rimas beginnings. This kind of, who wants to do this? Chi vuole in breve bianca e rossa falsi? He wishes in brief to make themselves white or red. Well, if you want to do that, buy this book. But the second verse is clearly wrestling with the dedicatee problem. Like, why would I give you a book of cosmetics? And again, it gets out of it by explaining that the recipient is in virtue the complete form and may want to teach others about gifts of nature. So themes are nature is full of secrets waiting to be discovered. They all have slightly awkward relationships with the female reader. And the idea that women will pass on this information to others seems to be really important. And it seems to be that they're kind of delving into this culture where, which is largely a non-written culture, an oral culture, or an oral culture indeed of showing people. And these are kind of written examples of things that are already going on that we often don't get in most texts. So we're going to the printed books. The book I've called The Venustar is attributed to Eustachio Celebrino, but it actually looks like it was a copy of an identical text, which was originally called the Corona della Donna. Now, these Corona della Donne, these texts were both published in 1526, but the Corona della Donne has a date on it. It's published the 1st of March, which was the first day of the Venetian year. So it's almost certainly it came before the text attributed to Celebrino. I'm really not sure about this attribution to Eustachio Celebrino. He seemed to write how-to texts about all manner of things, and people play really fast and loose with authorship in this period. I think it's an essentially pirated text, and it was repeated and reprinted many, many times up until 1563. And there's various changes. Sometimes it's attributed to Eustachio, sometimes it's not. Anyway, whoever wrote it, the opening verse is absolutely glorious. It kind of is very far away from these very serious attestations of like looking after nature and finding secrets and everyone, not needing this verse yourself. It just starts, women who wish to make themselves beautiful, this will fulfill your desire. And do in such a way to make the fake seem natural. So it's giving them all these tricks that churchmen like Juan Luis Vives warned against. It then lays out its stall of cosmetic recipes. Here are cosmetics that are white and vermilion, various compositions of distilled water to grow and remove hairs and eyebrows, fleshy spots on the face and so on, lotions for gloves. And then it makes it clear that the women are expected to listen to this book. You can listen to me without effort, without serious expense or wasted time. This buys you a nymph for a friend who is next to you in every verse. This leaf bit is very far away from the courtly setting of the manuscript and probably should be understood as part of the popular print that Rosa Salzburg has so discussed so brilliantly, sold for a few pennies on the piazza and likely alongside made-up cosmetic remedies that were often sold by street sellers, as this guy walking along second to left selling specchia e pomata, mirrors and pomades, and also ingredients, roses and beauty accessories such as combs. So I think we should understand this text really as part of this popular culture. Okay, so we've got 3 texts now. First of all, there's this kind of aristocratic culture of scientific kitchen knowledge. Then there's the more humble books that would have sold for much less money, which were part of an oral culture of making, that we can see perhaps in a lower class, a less economically, less financially fortunate class of women. And these we can see as part of the big proliferation of these leaflets, these very short opusculi that Plebani talks about in her recent book, which teach people all sorts of things, including how to read languages, how to embroider, and so on. We know that some women made a living from selling and developing makeup, and also going around houses, for example, plucking eyebrows. And this is an image from the Retrato della Lozzana Andalusa, which shows Lozzana, the main character of this kind of picaresque story, plucking eyebrows for a client in her home. Cosmetics could be associated with this kind of plebeian culture is carried out as well in Rossetti's book about the art of perfumery, which has an incredible and also quite difficult to translate introduction, which talks about how actually the plebeians are central to the invention of perfumery. Perfumery has arisen from the art of us plebeian artisans. He also says it's essentially Venetian, even though he does the normal thing with books of secrets, saying he's travelled very far and got these ideas from everywhere, and that these decoctions are important. I'm just going to skip on because I've spent such a long time talking about these institutions. Marinello is a physician. He's from near Modena. He has links with people like Luca Ghini, with Fallopio, with Luigi Anguillara and the Botanic Gardens in Padua. So he's a university trained physician, and he really, completely unlike Rossetti, tries to elevate cosmetics to this art and has a massive introduction where he talks about how actually it's a really important for cosmetics to understand cosmetics as improving nature. He says, just like animals, plants, and metals are refined, so can human beauty also undergo cultivation, transformation, and refinement. Okay, Marinello's book was really, really important. It was published 3 times, 1474 and 1610, and also translated or kind of made into versions in German, French, and English. Okay, skip. Okay, for some reason. Okay, so what's in them? What are people caring about? What's in these books? Basically, similar kind of recipes are in all these books, but in different kinds of proportions. So this is the Walters. Walters has 75 recipes in it. Soaps has a few recipes for soaps, 3 recipes for soaps, mainly recipes for perfumes, which includes all sorts of powders, oils, waters, and pomanders. Perfumes are the real respectable end of cosmetics because they're not changing your appearance, and perfumes are also used for health. You know, you're controlling the air around you. Air is one of the 6 non-naturals that you can use to affect your humours, and so it's kind of feeds into health and very, very respectable. Hair care is also mentioned here, though significantly not hair removal, which is a standard in most books of cosmetics, because the writer thinks that's cosa repugnante la natura, it's a repugnant thing for nature. And then there's much smaller section on facial skincare and a large section on medicinal recipes. And these tend to often be medicinal recipes relating to women. So it could be to do with pregnancy or to do with breast size, to do with stretch marks on the stomach. Bologna 1640 is divided into treatises, but basically it covers exactly the same. It has 211 recipes. You'll see these recipes go up and up as we go through time. Chiara de Correggio's book has 247 recipes, and they're almost all on facial skincare, with a few on perfumes and a handful on other body parts. One of the most interesting things is to see how this plays out with the Venusta books. And these, unlike the manuscripts, have a big focus on facial skincare, but also an awful lot on hands. So the pink section here are all recipes about hands. It has recipes for soap and for hair care and hair removal. I think hands would probably been particularly difficult to keep white and soft if you were someone who was working. Also, it has an unusual section on getting rid of various insects in the house in the last page, after all the medicinal recipes and a kind of miscellaneous household tips about how to kill chickens and things like that, which you really wouldn't get Chiara Correggio doing. Rossetti is a total mess. He just sticks his recipes down, he seems, as he finds them, but they deal with the same amount. But it's just a very, very difficult recipe book to use and to follow. The work that Italian philologists have done has shown that he does copy a lot of recipes, and often badly copies a lot of recipes from other books. Marinello, who has more than 1,200 recipes in his book. It's a big book, and there's more still in the 1574 and 1610 editions, is very well organized. The first book is on body washes, hair removal, perfumes, weight loss, and body shaping. The second on hair care, baldness cures, and hair color. The third on facial skincare, ailments part of the face from forehead to chin, and the fourth on the rest of the body. He also has introductions to each part of the face, what poets and painters say about it and how it should look. So this is an example on what the nose should look like. So he often has 2 or 3 pages on what ears should look like, what chins should look like, what lips should look like. And he'll often quote from Ariosto or Fiorenzuola. He often just steals stuff from Fiorenzuola without a quote, but he'll also quote from Ariosto and Petrarch and say, Laura's eyes looked like this, and this is the following recipes will show you how to achieve that look. It's very prescriptive about what constitutes beauty. If you look at these texts with text mining, and I've just done this for the Corona Venusta and the Chiara di Correggio so far, you can see that they, although they have similar concerns, they actually do them very differently. So the top ingredient terms from the Corona are really ingredients you'd find in a kitchen. Water, oil, rose water and rose petals are everywhere, but you get a lot of fat and grease in the Corona Venusta recipes, including pig fat, deer fat and kid fat, whereas Chiara di Correggio is obviously more interested in alchemical substances, so you get more talc, more silver, more litharge in her texts. Similarly, when you're looking at tool and vessel terms in the Venusta, they tend to be kitchen vessels that are used. This is a kitchen. There's no really nothing any special, not much that's special or particular for making beauty recipes in these texts. There's much more discussion of stills and distillation apparatus in Chiara di Correggio. Now, although women did have access to distillation apparatus, kind of regular women, there's lots of women like apothecaries' wives who make waters. There's Tessa Story found a great trial record about a woman called Maddalena the Weaver, who was accused of poison in Rome in the early 17th century, who made medicinal waters using distillation equipment. But it's not regular equipment that you'd find in inventories. And that's much less important in the Venusta than it is in Chiara di Correggio. And it's likely that if things like rose water, for example, was needed, that people would go to an apothecary to get parts of the ingredients. Or sometimes Marinello says in his text that women should just go to the apothecary and find and get the apothecary to make up these recipes for them. Give you a sense of the kinds of recipes that's in the Corona, in the Venusta. So in these, in the kind of recipes that poorer women may have been using. The very first recipe is called a face ointment that was used by a great queen, and its main ingredient is snail slime. So 5 ounces of snail slime from snails, then goat's grease, then the marrow from the leg bones of rams or calves, rice and egg white. So a lot of this is what would be in a kitchen, and often things that would be the byproduct of cooking. And you see this throughout these this Venusta text, that they're not using complicated ingredients that would be expensive in the main. So people also add recipes a lot to these texts. We're going to look at evidence of readership here, and there is some evidence of what recipes were used in the Corona text, in the Venusta text, in the Welcome. So these asterisks show that the recipes that were used were to make the face beautiful and breath-scented, which is rosemary flowers boiled in white wine. To make the hair curly, willow root and boiled in lye to wash the hair. And to make the hands and face white, nettle leaves, make a powder out of them, put it in water and boil it. Basically, the recipes that are asterisked in this text are the short ones that have clear and useful results. And you see this throughout the text. And I'm going to show you Marinello as well in a second. But actually, people tend to mark the texts that are mark the recipes that are short and easy to make. So there's 177 excellent copies of Marinello, and I've seen 62 of them, of which 39 have some kind of annotation. Most of these, about half of them, have signs of ownership. Some are unreadable, but most of the signs of ownership are by men, including several large collectors, as you'd expect, several people who are kind of in this natural philosophy set. People like Ulisse Aldrovandi had a copy. There's a copy in the Society of Links library. John Dee had a copy. Some were doctors and surgeons, and some had these book collectors. The three women. This one, Dorothea Tesaura of Capria, which is near Turin. This is a book in a private collection that I have only seen photographs of, unfortunately. This one was given to Ami, who was the beloved of the book collector Nicolas Moreau d'Auteuil, so that was in France. And this one in Spain, in the Biblioteca España, says, Mi querido esposo, my beloved husband. And has little pictures of birds and little decorations throughout. So this was presumably owned by a woman. But most of these books were owned by men. Most of these books that exist were owned in the medical profession. And this is really normal for Italian texts, and may well be more to do with survival, but also to do with the people who were interested in using them and how these books were used, not necessarily by reading, but by talking through them. So accordingly, some of these books are annotated through spotting sources. So Marinello had an eclectic range of sources. He was a doctor, and a lot of the people who read it were also doctors and apothecaries, and spotted sources like Galen, for example, Hippocrates, and Wecker. A lot of these annotations are in Latin. Other people are clearly trying to take control of these texts, and they number the recipes and they order them. Some of them make editorial changes. So the Welcome 1574 tries to correct text and correct spelling to be more like the 17th century, the kind of spelling that was in current use in the 17th century. So that's obviously quite a bit of a later reader. Some take the text to task. So in this Munich 1610 volume, and this recipe, which tells you to change the color of your eyes by from blue to brown by putting ink in your eyes, it says falso by the side of the text. Others make it clear that the ingredients used in these recipes are incorrect. What surprised me actually was that a lot of the texts are interested in the prefaces that describe ideal beauty, and so you do get a lot of people actually reading these prefaces, which suggests that people do take them seriously and do seek to either search for women with these qualities, or perhaps women who are reading them who are searching to have these qualities themselves. The major beauty concerns, are baldness cures, and this comes through in several of the texts, and I think it's largely because these are owned by men. So these people looking for baldness cures, but their women also lost their hair for things like smallpox and scabies, perhaps. So baldness seems to be a major concern. Thinness is an issue. There's a lot of advice on how to become fatter in these texts, and a lot of these recipes are annotated, so not being plump enough is clearly an issue for women in this period. Aging is the other thing. So various signs of aging: wrinkles, grey hair, breasts that have got too large, stretch marks on the stomach. These are all really popular recipes. There's a recipe for stretch marks that is often annotated as well. But the most popular recipe, by far the most popular recipe that people were interested in, is a recipe for scabies, a scabies cure. I think that this is something that Story and Cavallo noted as well. I think that scabies, because secondhand clothing was so popular, because people shared clothing, because clothing wasn't washed very often, that the scabies mite must have been really, really constant. It's incredibly itchy. It must have been very frustrating. And this cure is for lemon balm. Is again a very short recipe. It's for lemon balm and white wine. You leave it to macerate, and then you distill it in a glass vessel. Now, I've tried this with home distillation equipment, and it comes out as this kind of liquor-y type, really strong alcohol. But it's obviously promises an awful lot of stuff. It promises to cure stinking breath, to make spoilt wine better, to dilute urine, prompt menstruation, deal with swelling, afflicted spirits. It helps people who can't speak. It cures worms. It helps the intellect and improves the memory. So you can see why this was so useful and important. And it's a very, very easy recipe to make. The other thing that that is very intriguing is that a lot of these books do have evidence of use on this. So this is a charming example where in a book in the Bodleian, Marinello copy in the Bodleian, where there are splashes on the front of on the frontispiece, which I thought might be ink pen trials initially. Then I thought they'd go through the book and gradually until you get to the page which is for dyeing a chestnut hair dye. So it seems that somebody has dyed their hair and gone back to the recipe with the dye still on it, and accidentally got some of their hair dye on the book. Though it would be, whether it'd be possible to actually test this, it seems fairly convincing, but there's an awful lot of books in this way with hair dye on it. Okay. So I feel like I've gone through lots of text and shown you lots of things, and I'm just going to not really conclude, but kind of think through some things by looking at the Metelli again. So this print by Giuseppe Maria Metelli offers in the end not just a metaphor for the ordinariness of cosmetic practice, right? Because it's ordinary. It's a thing that most people, that most women certainly would have known about, even if they didn't all do it. But a way of also understanding the instability of the textual field. Like the game board, these books lay out a sequence of actions. Unlike it, however, they don't agree on the rules of the game. What emerges from reading them together is not a settled tradition, but a contested genre. In the process of formation, not even in the process of formation, cosmetics continues to be a contested space because it's so problematic between medicine and pharmacy, between, associated with women. It has knowledge between kind of academic knowledge, intellectual knowledge, but also hands-on knowledge of the properties of materials. Authors frame their materials so differently. Cosmetic knowledge belongs to nymphs, to pharmacists, to doctors, to plebeians. Most texts struggle with the legitimacy of the subject and the position of the reader. The only exception perhaps is a Venesta, which offers its recipes to a poorer female audience without apology. What they share is not a unified position, but a common recognition that this material requires justification, framing, and at times defense. Users of these books too participate in shaping what this genre is. The marks in surviving copies suggest a clear preference for brevity, clarity, and efficacy. Short recipes provide promising quick and sometimes extraordinary results that attract the most attention. The predominance of male ownership in extant copies complicates any straightforward assumption about readership, though I think rather than indicating a primarily male audience, it likely reflects the mechanisms of survival and collection, and also the importance of female beauty for families and for lineage, where brides could seal a family's fate if they made the right match, and wives were responsible for their husband's fidelity. So beautification has this clear role in household practice, and is also useful professionally for both doctors and philosophers. So the point isn't just that cosmetics formed a part of the daily round, it's that these texts repeatedly seek to delineate domains of activity with their own rules, audiences, and forms of expertise. What cosmetics consisted of, whether they illicit or not, and how they fed into class status and the virtue of women, all these questions were highly facile, changeable, like as in the game with the roll of the dice. And I have to say, I haven't come to any more conclusion than that these are a genre, that they need more looking at, and that I suppose watch this space, because I'll have more to say about this in a couple of months' time when I've looked more at the text. But anyway, thank you.